Good evening, History Moss 141. It's Professor Luna. I'm recording this video to discuss this week's module, some of the content in the module itself, and the assignment that we have for this week, which will be our discussion assignment. And just I wanted to provide you with a few reminders and also include a small lecture at the end, a kind of mini lecture around 5 to 10 minutes or so, covering some of the major themes and topics and ideas that you'll be discussing. All right, so first I'll begin with the essay assignment topic. You still have time to submit your topic. The essay assignment topic will close tomorrow, Tuesday, July 13th, but you can submit it after that, and you will receive a 25% deduction. If you submit it Wednesday, then that deduction increases to 50% by Thursday. So please see the course syllabus for deductions on late work. I do accept it, but you only have a couple of days to submit, and after that the assignment will close. All right, so first thing was the essay topic. The second would be the knowledge check that you might still be working on today, and it's the same situation. If you're submitting it today, you will receive a 25% deduction, or 25 points in this case, for the knowledge check, as it's 100 points possible, and then so forth. All right, so if you have any questions about either of these, please let me know. It might be a little late to go over the knowledge check, but I'll mention in the email that I send out about this video, and then if you have questions, please just message me. I would have hoped that if you needed assistance with that assignment, you would have contacted me by now. All right, so let's take a look at the week 4 module. So this is part 3 of our course. Can you believe we're essentially halfway done with the course? Thank you all for working with me, and I've been glad to have the Zoom meetings with the class. Hopefully maybe for this week's Zoom meeting, which I haven't announced just yet, but there might be more folks that can join. But either way, it's been awesome to work with you all so far. All right, so part 3 of our course focuses on the colony of New Spain. New Spain was a viceroyalty of Spain, a colony with Spain being the mother country, and essentially all of these various viceroyalties being the quote-unquote children of Spain, or connected to the mother country. And I just want to briefly touch on this week's reading and content. You have about 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We got 5 chapters to read this week. I know you're probably not gonna have time to read every single word and every single page, but I do suggest that you take a look at the chapter titles, get an idea of what each chapter will cover, take a look at the first page and the last page of each chapter, and then for those sections within the chapter, take a look at the first few sentences of those as well. That's a good way to start, at least skimming the material, to get an understanding of some of the major events and topics and themes that are being discussed. And some questions I had were, what are the larger themes and patterns that as you read the textbook? What are the terms, ideas, or statements that you're already familiar with? This relates to your prior knowledge. And then if there's something you don't know, it's expected as an independent learner that you're going to research and you're going to look for these terms and look for the definitions and establish some context to try to better understand what you're reading. If it seems like all jargon and it's something that you don't understand, you have to take the steps as an independent learner to begin figuring out how you can make sense of that material. All right, so the objectives for this week's module, the week 4 module, define what a viceroyalty is and how New Spain fits within the Spanish imperial order. Identify the primary goals of a colony and its relationship with the mother country. So why did Spain choose to acquire, hold, establish, and then develop this this territory and what were the reasons, what were the goals of this project essentially. You'll describe the major characteristics of the colonial economy, the colonial church, and colonial society. And so those are broad themes, and within each of those themes or topics are sub-themes or subtopics that you could kind of splinter off into, right? For colonial society, for instance, we could talk about gender, we can talk about race, we can talk about socioeconomic status or class. Those are some of the things that we might be thinking about. Activities and assignments for the week are that you're going to look at the module, right? You're going to read the content. There's a couple of videos that I'll show you real quickly before I move on to the second part of this video, and you'll complete the discussion 3 assignment. All right, so let me start by going over the discussion 3 assignment. As usual for the discussion assignments, you'll always want to take a look at the rubric, and I think there might be a couple different views that you as a student have, whether it's listed here with the 3 dots or whether it's shown at the bottom of the assignment, but this will break down how your assignment's being scored, right? So please take a look at that before you begin the assignment. Your first post is due by Thursday, July 15th, and your final reply post is due by Sunday, July 18th. And we have the purpose of the assignment. We have the learning objectives that it meets with the associated course student learning objective for the larger student learning objective of the course, which is the essay and to learn about this history. So the task is that you read all the module content, and there's 2 videos within the module that you'll want to watch. The first is titled Dark Continents, and the second is titled The Casta Painting Video by smarthistory.org. Between these 2 themes, the church or race and racial mixing in New Spain, you need to choose one of those themes. So again, you will choose either the theme of the role of religion in the church in New Spain, or you will choose the theme of race and racial mixing in New Spain. Okay, so once you've done that, you've watched the videos, you've read the content in the modules, you've read the chapters, or at least taken a look at the chapters that are going to apply to this assignment, which would be the church and the colonial society chapter. Okay, once you've selected that theme, say I chose the colonial church, then next what I'll do is I'll search online for an image that I believe represents this theme as it relates to New Spain. So you want to make sure it represents religion, and then you want to make sure it also represents New Spain. That would be the second component. If it's simply just a picture of a church back in Spain, it's not totally meeting the mark for what the assignment calls for. So please note that as you research. You're going to post your image to our discussion forum, and then you're going to answer a few questions about your image, all right? So if you don't know how to embed an image in the discussion forum, you can go to this Canvas instruction website, and it's going to break down how you'll embed that image in a discussion reply from the student view, or from your view, from your side of Canvas. Okay, so please take a look at that. The questions you're going to answer about your image include: what is the title? Where did you find it? And you'll include the URL, or you'll include the web address. So you're essentially, once you find your image, you're just going to copy this URL that's listed in the bar, in your browser bar. You'll copy that, and then you'll paste it to your discussion post. Explain what you see in the image. Provide 2 to 3 explicit details about the image. Consider the colors used. Consider the symbolism. Consider the accuracy. For instance, a number of the images that you're going to encounter are created by European artists, some who had never set foot in New Spain but are depicting these images frozen in time, right? So they might be representing Tenochtitlan, the fall of Tenochtitlan, but they had never been to New Spain. Only off of secondhand accounts and other images are they able to paint or produce these works of art or other imagery. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about the details. How does this image represent the theme of religion or colonial church or race/castas? This image can represent the role of the church because it's an image of a church that the Spanish built during the colonial era, etc., etc. So you'll go on and add to that discussion. So it might be a little challenging to kind of expand on some of these questions, but I think you'll be able to do so if you take some time to kind of analyze the image and see what you can draw out of it. The reply questions will be, what was different about your classmate's image versus your image? Tell us in a couple of sentences what the difference is. I mean, the first obvious difference might be if they're talking about a different theme, then that's something you can note. And then number 2, elaborate. Can you find any additional image or theme connections not discussed by your classmates? So can you add to their discussion essentially? Can you make additional connections maybe that they didn't spot on their attempt at analyzing the image? I'm hoping that you can come up with something. I mean, if you're challenged by that, then you can say, I believe that, the image has been analyzed well, and I couldn't really make any additional or draw any additional connections. All right, so there's 2 parts to the assignment. The first is research and image selection, and of course your post. You'll do that by Thursday the 15th. And then the second is to reply to your classmate, and you'll do that by July 18th. All right, so that'll be my summary of the discussion assignment. Please let me know if you have any questions. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the mini lecture that's going to talk about some of the themes that I just addressed here in the discussion assignment. So this is a 3-part PowerPoint that I've created for MAS 141. Some of it's drawn from our textbook, some of it's drawn from previous textbooks that I've used for the course. So I just want to go over some of the first few images because I think they really pertain to our course and what we're going over right now. Part 2 and Part 3 especially will be, looking forward. And I think the part on Alta California is really important because we don't really dive deep into Alta California in our book, but it's local history, it's our state history. So definitely take a look at that when you have a moment. Okay, so beginning with social organization in the Viceroyalty of New Spain. How is the Viceroyalty of New Spain organized economically, socially, politically, and culturally? We're looking at how all of these various facets of Spanish colonial society were organized. And this is really a top-down structure, especially when we're talking about the economy, society, and politically. Everything's emanating from the crown, the Spanish kings and queens, the monarchs essentially, and then the church as well plays a significant role. So initially from Rome, the head of the capital of the Catholic Church, and then that emanating to Spain, and then to the new quote-unquote New World. And then thinking about the way the casta painting reflects or just shows us this really fascinating window into New Spain, but there, as the video points out, there's some problems with maybe the way that that's represented, and the accuracy is questioned, especially in that discussion. Well, I wanted to provide a couple of examples of labor organization. The Mita, this is one that's derived from the Incan Empire, but we'll see similar examples in the case of the Mexica or the Aztec. And these are systems that are in place that are already in use, and the Spanish are able to kind of tap in and adapt their own needs to these labor systems. But essentially, the ruling parties call upon the commoners, utilize their labor for X amount of days or X amount of time, and these are to contribute to these public work projects, building roads, of course, building these monumental structures that we've seen in Tenochtitlan. Of course, we don't see them now because they're gone, but thinking about like Teotihuacan and Tikal and some of the other Mayan sites as well. These are a reflection or the end product of these labor systems. And this initial el repartimiento is initialized during the early stages of Spanish colonialism, the initial Brutus system in which indigenous peoples were seized and enslaved. Under this system, native communities provided labor for public projects, agriculture, mines, and as carriers of goods. It also included the requirement that the natives purchase goods from Spanish authorities. So this is a looped-in economic system. Not only are we extracting labor, but then in a circular motion, you're forced to buy our goods. There is no economy or market legally outside of the Spanish colonial economic system and markets. Everything has to come from Spain. And this is a common theme, not only in the case of the Spanish, but other colonial powers like England, like the Dutch, the French as well. We see that kind of similar pattern in play. So this new system that's implemented is the Encomienda system. This is established in 1503 to replace those earlier systems of labor extraction or organization. And the idea is that conquistadores or landowners in some instances, or many instances I should say, and then more by extension those who own the Haciendas, the large estates, they're basically given power over native communities that are not staying solely separated in their own settlements. They're coming into places like the Hacienda, and the owner, or the person in charge essentially of that land in that area is tasked with Christianizing them, and they're in turn taking care of them. But generally speaking, many historians have categorized this as a state of virtual slavery. There were no rights, obviously, and it was a brutal system as well, right? The Encomienda system rewarded conquerors with land grants and allotments of Indian labor, and the conquerors were obliged to Christianize them and treat them justly. But the reality of such treatment was overridden by the desire of free labor. So if there was no requirement, or anybody obviously following up or checking on the status, health, and well-being, the welfare of these native peoples under control of conquistadores or hacendados, etc., there was no need for them to essentially ensure they're at their best, in other words. So the hacienda played a large role, especially in the early stages. Later on in Spanish colonial society, these haciendas would kind of dwindle, but they really served as a self-contained world. They often had their own market, or in-house market. They had their own in-house place of worship, a church where local priests would come and give service. They were able to produce, and via the use of Indian labor, produce goods that they needed to sustain themselves. And even those who lived outside of the hacienda often had to access water or needed land or other items, so they had to still pay tribute to the hacendados who were were the owners there at the top of the pyramid, so to speak. So there's this rigid labor system of the hacienda. The hacendados, or the patrones, those are the owners of the land. We have the peones, who work the land, the campesinos, who work small holdings of their own, and then the vaqueros, who tended to the needs of the hacienda. Those were the ones who oversaw the livestock, etc. That was their role. And as I mentioned, it's a self-contained world. For 250 years, they were at the center of the economy in Latin America. They were especially important in places like Mexico, right? And you can go and visit and see the hacienda today in various states throughout Mexico, where these structures have been preserved and are still operating in some instances, obviously not with those kind of rules of labor extraction, but I mean in the sense of they still function and they still serve a need, maybe even, I'm not sure, but as a place you could stay. I'm sure there's probably some boutique hotel out there that used to be a hacienda, right? A huge structure. And I talked a little bit about this, my more localized organization, but on a larger scale, the political institutions, the viceroyalties, the audiencias, the cabildos. These are the kind of the layers of political organization, and the people who inhabited the positions of power within each of these political institutions had rank, and the closer or higher you got in that hierarchy, generally those were going to be those born in Spain of Spanish descent, known as peninsulares, those who were born on the Iberian Peninsula. The Creoles or Creoles were born in New Spain but of Spanish descent. The Mestizo were the mixed. The Indio, the Africano were those who were of indigenous background, of African ancestry, generally imported as slaves into places like Veracruz, places, and then settling in regions throughout Mexico, especially southern Mexico. What were some other forms of social control? Well, Spanish was the official language. There was no attempt to, I guess, maintain and to preserve indigenous languages. And oftentimes, as I previously mentioned in the last lecture, the history, the documents, the important artifacts of these cultures were generally destroyed, right, in an attempt to erase that history. But it lived on. We know it lived on, and we have evidence of that, especially as shown in the Dark Continents video this week. I think it does a really good job of like showing how, despite all of the challenges, there had to be some kind of syncretism where there had to be an allowance of these religions, previous indigenous practices and customs, because as they mentioned in the video, to forcefully convert somebody, generally speaking, it's gonna not be a successful project. So those are some of the slides that I think pertain to the chapters that we're covering today. As I mentioned, this second part talks about Alta California, Upper California, and New Mexico in particular. Those were the areas where the Spanish had a great presence, and then later we'd see Texas and other parts of the Southwest settled. Florida is an initial place of settlement, but never really is populated into the degree at which these other states or regions are. So one last point I want to make as you're thinking about this area and this region in New Spain is the way in which settlement takes place, and the fact that there's not a really dense population would later become a big problem for New Spain and then later Mexico. And then that leads us to thinking about the settlements in Texas, in New Mexico, California. And at that time, obviously, they're not called that, but how would Mexico deal with trying to hold their ground there? All right, so I'll finish it off there. Thank you all for your time, and if you have any questions about the module, about the discussion assignment, please shoot me an email, and I'll be glad to chat with you. All right, have a great week, and I will talk to y'all soon.